Hello, I'm Professor Alison Rees, based at Cardiff University, and I'm going to talk to you today about an evaluation project that I ran, which was looking at a scheme called Together a Chance, which was a pilot scheme placing a social worker in 2 women's prisons in England. The main finding was that having a dedicated prison social worker was hugely beneficial to support mothers' relationships with their children. There were also huge benefits for the mental health of mothers, and it helped reduce children's anxiety. In Wales, we don't have a women's prison, so this means that women have to go across the border to serve sentences, and it becomes very difficult then for their family to visit them, both because prisons are often in remote locations, the cost of travelling isn't funded up front for families and for children. Also, it's difficult to communicate with prisons and arrange a visit for families.
The aim of the project was to see whether putting a dedicated social worker in women's prisons would have positive outcomes for women and their families.
Just a little bit of background. Women serve short sentences for lesser offences, so they quite often are in prison for not paying TV licences and shoplifting. And when the mother is in prison, children often move to live with extended family, with friends, move into foster care, across local areas, across the region. Quite often they have to move school as well, so particularly difficult for them. Children find it difficult to make contact with their mother once she's in prison because they don't know who it is that they should be ringing. There's currently no social work provision in prisons relating to accessing children or links to children's services. And once a mother is in prison, it's virtually impossible to make contact with professionals outside because she doesn't have access to a phone all of the time, and she can't make calls at pre-arranged times to meet a social worker. And as we know, social workers in the community are very, very busy.
So the Together a Chance project came about because Lord Michael Farmer, in his 2019 review of women's family ties in women's prisons in England, suggested that there should be a women's social worker in each prison and to help with family matters. Pact were in a really good position at the time to implement that as a proof of concept. So with generous funding from the Sylvia Adams Trust, we put a social worker into HMP Eastwood Park in Gloucester and HMP Send in Surrey.
So our methodology for the study, we took a really multi-pronged approach, and we spent 2 days in each of the prisons. These were observational visits to understand the regime, thinking about the regime restrictions, the culture, staffing, and what facilities existed in the prison. We developed what we called a tracker for each woman who accessed the service, and in total, the 2 social workers worked with 94 women. And this tracker gave us information about previous imprisonment, numbers of children, experiences of domestic abuse, and the focus of the intervention. We did not collect any data on the mother's main index offence. And we collected 63 surveys from mothers. We interviewed 8 mothers in prison and 6 women 1 month after they'd been released. We undertook 4 interviews with carers and children. And whilst we were in the prison, we also interviewed 8 staff and received 11 survey responses from prison staff. We undertook a survey, and we had 14 responses and 8 interviews with community social workers and practitioners. Lastly, we interviewed relevant key informants, policymakers, to consider sustainability of the project and what might be the possible future funding. So we had a wide range of data to draw upon. Really just starting with some demographic information. The social workers worked with 94 mothers originating from 56 local authorities, and the majority of women, 62%, were aged between 30 and 39, and the age profile was broadly similar in both prisons. The majority of women were single, 72%, with implications for childcare and support arrangements. 45% of women had 3 or more children, so there were some large families involved here, and 12% of the women had 5 or more children. So obviously there's lots of practicalities to think about when there's a large sibling group. 29% of women reported being involved with social services as a child, and this compares to 1% across the general population. 46% of mothers reported having no direct or indirect contact with their children at the start of the intervention. Brothers and sisters were separated in 63% of cases where the mother has more than one child. Children were often moving across multiple placements, and in 55% of families, at least one of the children was accommodated away from their birth family. For 19% of mothers, at least one child had been or was being placed for adoption, resulting in the loss of parental responsibility. So the data that we collected gave us a real clear idea about where children were living, where they were moving, and what some of the issues were in relation to the families. So I'd really want to talk to you now about the nature of the social work role, and that differed across the 2 prisons.
So Eastwood Park is a remand and sentence prison, so we have quite a dynamic population. It could almost be considered transient, I suppose. A lot of the work that we do involves women coming in from police custody, so it can be quite reactive in terms of the response. A lot of women come in and they're not sure where their children are, or the arrangements that have been made for their children are really new. So, it doesn't have that stability and that consistency. There's a lot of worries and concerns about how the children are doing, how they've responded to mum leaving. Whereas at Send, a lot of the women have been in custody for some time already.
So the role at HMP Send is quite different because we have a population mostly of lifers. I think about 70 to 75% of our prisoners are serving sentences for life. A lot of the women on my caseload can't have access to their children. That's really difficult for mothers to sort of get their heads around. Because a mother will always be a mother. So a lot of the work that I do in my prison is around managing some of the expectations and trying to make the women understand that the decisions are made in the best interest of the children. So I've been doing a lot of liaising with community social services to make them understand that actually they can still have a part in their children's life, so they can still, share updates on how the children are doing. They still have a little something, and they don't feel like they're no longer involved at all.
So what we found was the social workers were real conduits of information, and the social workers were helping mothers to have contact with their children, were helping mothers to have contact with social workers in the community, and also helping women to have contact with courts and making sure that they attended courts so that their voice could be heard. And what we found surprisingly was that many social workers didn't even know where the mother was to begin with, and when they did find out where she was, they didn't know how to contact her, how to make contact with the prison, and to make arrangements to visit. And because social workers didn't know how to contact, decisions were being made over parenting matters without mothers being involved. Many women have historically had antagonistic and difficult relationships with social workers in the community. And this is exacerbated by the turnover of social work staff and the pressure on social workers in the community. What we found is the social workers in the prison were working both for the benefits of the child but also for the mothers. This is a short case study. Hugh's mother went to prison for a long time when he was very young, and he didn't really know anything about her. He was placed in foster care, away from family, and didn't have any contact with his mum. During lockdown, when he was a young teenager, he became really worried about his mum and he asked to go and see her. And the Pact social worker in the prison helped his mother Jan prepare for the meeting so she could handle the situation sensitively and not just ask him a barrage of questions. He found out during the meeting that she was from Scotland and that they both had an interest in art, and she gave him some of her drawings. When the home social worker next visited Hugh, she noticed he'd put the drawings up in his bedroom and he was starting to follow a Scottish football team. It's often far better for a child to know about a situation than being faced with a void, and they can only imagine the worst about their mother. The prison social workers were valued by the mothers because they were being treated for once as mothers, not just being as seen as their manger status being as prisoners. And the prison social workers were able to come alongside and garner trust, really. And so the mothers talked to us about feeling much more trusting of the social workers in the prison, and we felt the fact that it was a third sector social worker was helpful in this respect, because it differentiated them from local authority social workers, although they were trained and had knowledge of social service processes. Obviously, it's really important to acknowledge that there are cases where it won't be appropriate for children to have contact. So a few further findings were that contact issues were resolved for 88% of the 60 mothers where it was the aim to be doing something about that. For 20% of the mothers, contact was refused either on public protection grounds or because it was not in the child's best interests, and mothers were supported with this outcome.
The pilot project was successful, and it showed that there were a range of benefits to women, that their access to information and ability to participate in decisions regarding their children was upheld better when there was a social work professional involved. It had a positive effect on women's mental health, because worries about their children and their families is definitely one of the main causes of poor mental health and self-harm in women's prisons.
One of the main benefits of the project was that the social workers helped women to uphold their parental rights, and some social workers in the community weren't even aware that the women still had parental rights. So being that bridge between the mother in prison and the social worker in the community was an essential part of this project and the main benefit that was recognised.